The garden was the only place no one wanted her. That was how Winnie Blackwood had come to think of it. Not unkindly, just honestly. 5 years in her aunt's house had taught her exactly where she belonged and exactly where she didn't. The drawing room didn't. The dinner table, when guests came, didn't. But the garden, after supper, when the candles were lit indoors and no one thought to look for a poor relation among the roses, that belonged to her. She slipped out that evening the way she always did. Quiet feet, no lantern, just the last grey light and the smell of cut grass. She didn't expect anyone to be there. She was wrong. A man knelt by the hedge near the fountain, sleeves rolled, hands in the dirt, working with a patience that seemed somehow too careful for a man simply paid to do it. He looked up before she could retreat. He smiled. He didn't look away. "Good evening," he said. Winnie stopped. She hadn't meant to. "Good evening," she said back. "You're new." "I am." "Mrs. Fitch said the last gardener left rather suddenly." "He did." He wiped his hand on his coat, stood. "Mr. Coombe, I believe. The work didn't suit him." A pause. "My name's Nathaniel, if you'll permit the introduction. I know it's backward, a gardener introducing himself to a lady. You will forgive me." "You haven't overstepped anything." She meant it, more than she expected to. "I'm Winifred, Winnie. My aunt is Lady Ashworth. I'm her niece." A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it, though most days I feel considerably more like her housekeeper's shadow. Something shifted in his face. Attention, real attention, not the polite nothing she was used to. "What does a lady's companion do with her days?" he asked. Not idle, curious. She told him. The mending, the letters, reading aloud until her eyes tired, and the garden, the one place nobody required anything of her at all. They talked until the light went gold, then dim, then gone. She walked back to the house lighter than she'd walked anywhere in a long time. She told herself it was only conversation. She didn't quite believe it. 3 weeks earlier, though Winnie did not yet know it mattered, Nathaniel Vale had not planned to become a gardener. He had planned only to disappear for a season. His father's steward had sent reports for years. Tenants content, rents fair, cottages sound. Then a letter arrived from a vicar in the parish, careful and apologetic, mentioning a roof that had collapsed on a family of 5 during a storm, a roof the steward's own reports claimed had been repaired the spring before. He read it twice, then a third time. Then he went to his solicitor and asked a single question. How does a duke learn the truth of his own land when every report reaching him has already been shaped by the man he's questioning? The answer in the end was simple. He stopped being a duke for a season. He borrowed a name from an old schoolmaster, Nathaniel, plain enough. He let his hands blister. He let his coat wear thin, and in 3 months of quiet, unremarkable labor, he learned more about his own estate than 9 years of polished ledgers had ever told him. He'd walked the tenant cottages himself in the guise of a hired hand sent to check the drainage. He had seen the cracked chimneys the reports called sound. He had seen children too thin for a harvest year the ledgers called prosperous. He had said nothing yet. He was still gathering what he needed. but he had not expected in the middle of it to meet a woman kneeling in no garden of his own, in a household that wasn't his, who spoke to him as though he was simply a man, nothing more, nothing less. He had not expected to want so badly for that to stay true a little longer. The following weeks found their own rhythm. Winnie slipped out most evenings. Nathaniel was always there, sometimes working, sometimes simply waiting near the fountain, with the patience of a man who had learned exactly when she'd come. They talked about books. He claimed to have only heard them summarized. She didn't believe him, though she couldn't have said why. They talked about roses, the ones along the south wall he was coaxing back to life. They talked about her parents. She rarely spoke of them to anyone. She spoke of them to him. He mentioned his own family in careful, vague terms. She noticed. She didn't ask. She was too absorbed in the simple, novel pleasure of being listened to. It was late July when he asked her to dance. No music, just the evening settling gold around them. A gardener, Winnie said, laughing despite herself, asking a lady's companion to dance. That's either very forward, Nathaniel, or very foolish. I can't decide which. Perhaps it's simply honest. He held out his hand. I'd rather ask honestly and be refused than never ask and always wonder. She took his hand. They danced. No music, but insects humming, a bird settling somewhere close. His hand light at her waist, hers resting on a shoulder steadier than his station should have allowed. For the length of that dance, Winnie forgot everything. Forgot the poor relation kept on sufferance, forgot her cousin Prudence circling the season for a title, forgot it all.
Except being looked at, fully, without calculation. Neither of them noticed the curtain twitch in an upstairs window. Neither of them noticed the eyes behind it, sharp, already turning cold. If that secret dance already has you holding your breath, comment "The Roses" below and subscribe, because someone just watched every second of it and she is not going to keep quiet. Prudence Ashworth watched from her window until the dance ended. She did not move. She did not blink much either. Her plain, penniless cousin dancing with a gardener, while Prudence herself had spent an entire season chasing titled men through crowded ballrooms and had exactly nothing to show for it. It felt to her like an insult, personal, pointed. She raised it at breakfast. "Mother," buttering her toast, slow, deliberate, "I really must mention something rather improper I witnessed last evening." Lady Ashworth looked up. "Winnie has taken to meeting the new gardener after dark," Prudence said. "Dancing with him, a common laborer, Mother." Lady Ashworth set down her teacup, harder than necessary. "Dancing," she repeated, "with the gardener." Her eyes moved to Winnie. "Winifred, is this true?" Winnie felt the heat rise in her face. Not shame exactly, exposure. "We spoke, Aunt. We danced once. There was nothing improper in it. He's a kind man, and—" "He is a servant, Winifred." Sharp, final. "You are my niece, whatever else you are in this house, and I will not have you behaving in a way that reflects poorly on this family, because you've grown lonely enough to seek company from the gardening staff. You will not go to the garden after dark again. Aunt, is that understood?" Winnie wanted to argue, wanted to say that Nathaniel had never once been anything but respectful, that the hour with him was the only part of her day that felt like it belonged to her. She said none of it. 5 years had taught her arguing changed nothing, only made her welcome thinner. "I understand," she said, quietly. She did not mean it. She found Mrs. Fitch in the linen room an hour later, folding sheets with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had run this household longer than either Lady Ashworth or Prudence had lived in it. Winnie had not meant to say anything. It came out anyway. "My aunt's forbidden me from the garden after dark." Mrs. Fitch did not look up from her folding. "I heard." "You heard already?" "Miss, in a house this size, word travels faster than the post." A fold, a crease pressed flat with her tongue. "You've been meeting the new gardener." "We only talked." "I know that, child. I've eyes in my head. I've watched you come back through that side door every evening, looking considerably less pinched than you looked the month before." She set the sheet aside, looked at Winnie properly for the first time. "I'll not pretend I understand your aunt's reasoning. A companion isn't a prisoner, whatever she believes. But I'll tell you this much, since no one else in this house troubles to be honest with you. Be careful, Winnie. Not because he's beneath you, because I don't believe for one moment that he is." Winnie frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, a common gardener doesn't stand the way that man stands, doesn't speak the way he speaks when he forgets to mind himself. I've served in 3 great houses before this one, miss, and I know the difference between a man born to labor and a man merely doing it for a season." She picked up another sheet, didn't quite meet Winnie's eye again. "I'm not saying anything more than that. I'm saying watch him and watch yourself. Whatever he isn't nothing, and nothing good ever comes of a lady's companion falling for a man who isn't what he claims." Winnie left the linen room with considerably more to think about than she'd arrived with. She did not yet understand how right the housekeeper was.
"It occurred to me every evening," he held her gaze, "and every evening I couldn't say it. I've spent my whole life wanted only for what my title offers. These past weeks have been the first time in longer than I can remember that someone spoke to me and laughed with me and simply liked me, with no notion of who I was. I didn't want to lose that." A pause. "I was selfish in the keeping of it. I know that." Winnie didn't answer. She turned, walked back toward the house. She did not look back. She sat with it alone in her small room. A duke. She had danced, unchaperoned, entirely unaware, with one of the wealthiest men in England, while believing him a common gardener. The vertigo of it sat strangely beside something warmer she couldn't quite put out, because whatever else he'd lied about, the listening had been real, the curiosity had been real. She was certain of that, even now. Mrs. Fitch's warning came back to her that night, turning over and over as she lay awake. I don't believe for one moment that he is beneath you. The housekeeper had known before Winnie had known and said nothing outright, only enough to prepare her. Winnie found she wasn't angry at Mrs. Fitch for the silence. She understood it. Some truths had to be discovered rather than simply told. The trouble found its own way to arrive. Prudence learned the truth from a groundsman 2 days later. The new gardener had given orders to the head groundsman regarding the East Fields drainage. Orders followed instantly, without question, which no common laborer would ever be permitted to give. She pieced it together fast, faster than anyone expected of her. She was in her mother's sitting room within the hour, breathless. "Mother, the gardener, I don't believe he's a gardener at all." Lady Ashworth's eyes sharpened. "What are you suggesting?" "That whoever he truly is, he's considerably more than he's pretended. And if Winnie has stumbled into the company of someone of real consequence—" A pause, calculating. "It seems a waste that she should be the one to benefit, when I've done everything properly this season and have nothing to show for it." They arrived at a plan within the day. A dinner, small, formal. The estate steward invited, several respectable families, and quietly, deliberately, an invitation extended to the mysterious gardener himself, under the pretense of parish business, so that Prudence, properly dressed, properly seated, might make the impression the garden had denied her. If you already know this dinner is about to blow up in Lady Ashworth's face, comment "The Duke" below and subscribe, because what happens when Nathaniel walks through that door is worth every second. The evening arrived heavy with a tension no one in the house said aloud. Lady Ashworth fussed over the table twice more than necessary. Prudence, dressed in her finest, positioned, at her mother's direction, in the chair with the clearest view of the door. Winnie stood near the sideboard, plainest gown she owned, tray in her hands, not a guest tonight, staff. She hadn't expected him to come at all. The door opened. Not a plain-coated gardener, a man in fine, dark evening clothes, bearing entirely changed by the simple absence of mud on his boots. The butler's voice carried to every corner of the room. "His Grace, the Duke of Ashcombe." The reaction was immediate. Lady Ashworth's face drained, then flooded with something close to desperate delight. Prudence sat up straighter, eager. The guests murmured, low, confused, trying to reconcile rumor with the man now standing before them. Near the far end of the table, the estate's steward,
a wiry, grey-whiskered man named Pruitt, who had managed Ashworth's own smaller holdings for a decade, went noticeably pale, half rising from his chair as though considering whether the room offered any dignified means of escape. Nathaniel's gaze found him briefly, held, said nothing yet, but something in that single unhurried glance told Winnie, watching from the sideboard, that whatever business truly justified this dinner's invitation to the steward had considerably less to do with parish matters than anyone in the room besides Nathaniel understood. "Your Grace," Lady Ashworth said, rising with a curtsy so deep it bordered on theatrical. "We had no notion, that is, we are entirely honored. Please, do sit. I have arranged the seating specifically so that my daughter Prudence might have the pleasure of your company this evening." Nathaniel's eyes moved across the room, slow, deliberate, past Prudence's eager smile without any particular acknowledgment, past Lady Ashworth's flustered welcome, to the sideboard, where Winnie stood frozen, tray still in her hands, her plain gown and her place among the staff making painfully clear exactly how her aunt had chosen to treat her tonight. "I thank you for the invitation, Lady Ashworth," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying the same easy warmth Winnie remembered from their evenings in the garden, though now edged with something considerably more formal. "But I confess I find myself rather more interested in the company of your niece, Miss Blackwood. Would you do me the honor to join us at the table?" The room went entirely silent. Prudence's eager smile froze and then began to crack. Lady Ashworth's mouth opened and closed twice before any sound emerged.
And Winnie, still holding her tray, felt every eye in the dining room turn toward her. "Your Grace," Lady Ashworth managed finally, "my niece is presently occupied with the service. I'm certain she would not wish to—" "I would," Winnie said, setting down the tray with hands that trembled only slightly, and crossing the room to take the chair Nathaniel had already pulled out for her, ignoring the furious, humiliated flush spreading across Prudence's face. "I would very much wish to, Your Grace. Thank you." Dinner proceeded with a strange and unmistakable clarity settling over the table. Nathaniel directed his conversation consistently toward Winnie, asked after the books they'd discussed in the garden, referenced the South Wall roses with a familiarity that made plain to anyone paying attention exactly how much time the two of them had genuinely spent together. It was over the second course that Mr. Pruitt, still pale and now visibly perspiring despite the coolness of the room, attempted a clumsy diversion. "Your Grace, I understand you've taken some interest in the local estates this season," he said, his voice pitched a shade too bright. "I do hope you found the tenant reports satisfactory, wherever your inquiries have taken you." "Satisfactory," Nathaniel repeated, tasting the word as though it were slightly off. "That is an interesting choice, Mr. Pruitt. I confess I have spent the better part of 3 months walking cottages myself in considerably plainer clothes than these, and I did not find the state of several roofs, wells, and drainage channels to match the reports your office has forwarded to my solicitor for the better part of 2 years. The color that remained in Pruitt's face drained entirely. "Your Grace, We will discuss it fully at Ashcombe on Thursday," Nathaniel said, not unkindly, though the finality in it left no room for further comment at the table. The exchange left a ripple of confused murmurings among the other guests, none of whom fully understood what had just passed between the two men, but all of whom understood enough to sense that something considerable had shifted, and that the steward's evening had gone, in the space of 2 sentences, from merely uncomfortable to genuinely perilous. Winnie watched it with a small, private satisfaction she did not entirely examine. Whatever else Nathaniel had hidden from her, the reason for the hiding, at least, had been exactly as honest as he'd claimed. It was toward the end of the meal that Prudence, unable to bear the weight of her own public failure a moment longer, finally spoke. "I confess, Your Grace, I find it rather extraordinary that a man of your position should choose to spend his time courting a penniless companion when there are women of considerably more consequence readily available to him." The table went quiet again. Nathaniel set down his glass with a deliberate calm. Winnie recognized the stillness from the garden, the stillness he wore when genuinely displeased. "Miss Prudence," he said, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the room, "I have spent this entire summer disguised as a common laborer, specifically so that I might discover which people in this county would treat me with genuine kindness when they believed I had nothing at all to offer them in return. Your cousin spoke to me for weeks without once asking after my fortune or my title, laughed with me over books and roses and nothing more consequential than the weather, and treated me every single evening with a warmth I have rarely encountered from anyone aware of my true position. You, Miss Prudence, learned of my identity precisely 1 day before contriving this dinner, and I confess I find your sudden interest considerably less flattering than you perhaps intended to be." Prudence's face went through several distinct stages of humiliation before settling finally into a rigid, furious silence. Lady Ashworth, watching her daughter's entire strategy collapse in front of the very guests she had hoped would witness its triumph, seemed, for the first time in the whole of the evening, entirely at a loss for words. The house did not settle quickly once the guests had gone. Lady Ashworth remained in the drawing-room long after the last carriage had departed, staring into the dying fire with an expression Winnie had never seen on her before, something closer to fear than anger, the particular fear of a woman realizing how badly she had misjudged where her family's real fortune might have come from. Prudence did not come down at all. Winnie heard her, through the wall, pacing her room for the better part of an hour before the house finally went quiet. It was near midnight that Lady Ashworth summoned Winnie to the drawing-room. Winnie went, bracing herself for another rebuke. She found, instead, an aunt considerably smaller than the one who had forbidden the garden 3 days earlier. "Sit, Winifred." Winnie sat. Lady Ashworth did not look at her directly for a long moment. "I owe you, I think, some manner of apology," she said finally, the words costing her something to produce. "Aunt, you needn't. I do need to, actually." A sharp breath. "I have spent 5 years thinking of you as a burden this family carried out of obligation rather than affection, and I placed that burden at the sideboard tonight without a second thought, because it did not occur to me that you might be worth more than the use I had assigned you. I was wrong. I am not certain I know how to be anything other than wrong about you at this point, but I wished to say it plainly, at least once." Winnie did not entirely trust the sincerity of it yet. 5 years of small cruelties did not dissolve in a single midnight confession. But she recognized, too, that this was likely the closest thing to honesty her aunt had ever offered her, and she chose, carefully, to accept it as a beginning rather than demand it be an ending. "Thank you, Aunt," she said. "I should like to go to bed now, if you don't mind." Lady Ashworth nodded, said nothing further. Winnie left her sitting alone with the dying fire. The days that followed the dinner unfolded with a strange, unsteady tension throughout Ashworth Manor. Prudence retreated into wounded silence, broken occasionally by sharp remarks whenever she and Winnie were alone. Nathaniel called on the household formally 3 days later, in his own name and his own fine clothes, requesting a private audience with Winnie that Lady Ashworth, chastened and considerably more careful now, granted without a single word of objection. He found her in the same garden where they had first met, standing near the same fountain, and the sight of him in evening dress rather than a gardener's coat still struck her, even now, as something she had not entirely adjusted to. "I owe you an apology," he said, without preamble. "I should have told you the truth from the very first evening, rather than allowing you to spend weeks growing fond of a man who did not, strictly speaking, exist in the way you believed him to." "You did exist," Winnie said. "You simply existed with a different name attached. The man who spoke with me about my parents, who listened when I told him about the loneliness of this house, who asked to dance with me among the roses because he wished to, and not because any title required it of him. That man was entirely real, Nathaniel. I do not think I was fond of a lie. I think I was fond of you, and the title is simply a fact I have had to learn to hold alongside everything else I already knew." Something in his expression eased at that, a tension she had not fully registered until it left him. "What happened with Mr. Pruitt at dinner? You said Thursday." "He confessed the whole of it once he understood I already knew," Nathaniel said. 2 years of falsified reports, repairs claimed and never made, rents raised beyond what my father's own agreements permitted, with the difference quietly kept for himself. I have dismissed him, and I intend to see every family he wronged properly compensated before the year is out." A pause. "I would not have known any of it, Winnie, had I not spent a season believing myself simply a gardener, had I not met you in the middle of it. Then some good came of the deception at least. More good than I deserve, given how it began." He took her hand then, there by the fountain, and something in the plainness of the gesture felt more significant than anything grander might have. "I would like to ask you properly, Winnie, in my own name this time, with nothing hidden between us. I have spent my whole life surrounded by people who wanted my title, and precious few who ever wanted simply me. I do not wish to spend the rest of it that way. Will you marry me?" Winnie looked at him for a long moment, this man she had first met kneeling in the dirt with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, who had asked her to dance with a nervousness that had felt at the time entirely unlike a duke's confidence, and who had 3 nights ago chosen her openly and without hesitation in front of a room of people who had spent 5 years treating her as barely worth noticing at all. "Yes," she said, "though I should tell you, Nathaniel, I intend to keep tending my own small corner of whatever garden we end up with. I find I've grown rather attached to the roses." "I would expect nothing less," he said, laughing, and drew her into a dance right there among the very bushes where it had all begun. No music but the evening settling gold around them, exactly as it had the very first time. If that proposal among the roses just made your week, comment "The Garden" below and subscribe, because the epilogue is coming and it's worth staying for. News of the engagement moved through the county faster than either of them expected, faster certainly than Lady Ashworth was prepared for. She spent the first days in a strange, humbled quiet, the particular quiet of a woman recalculating an entire season's worth of assumptions about which niece actually mattered. She did not apologize outright a second time. She wasn't built for that. But she stopped assigning Winnie to the sideboard, stopped speaking of her as a housekeeper's shadow, started instead referring to her carefully, almost testing the words, as "my niece, soon to be the Duchess of Ashcombe." Winnie noticed, said nothing, let it be enough. Prudence took longer, 2 full weeks of stiff silence, before she came to Winnie's room one evening, uninvited, and stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and her chin lifted in the particular way she always held herself when she meant to apologize and didn't yet know how. "I behaved badly," Prudence said finally, "at the dinner, before it too." Winnie set down her book. "You did. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't jealous. A breath, I spent the whole season chasing something you found without trying. It felt unfair." "It wasn't a competition, Prudence. I know that now. I didn't know it then." Winnie considered her for a long moment. "Thank you for saying so." It wasn't warmth exactly, but it was honest, and after 5 years of very little honesty passing between them, Winnie found she could live with that. Mrs. Fitch, when Winnie told her the news, only smiled and said she'd known the truth of him long before either Winnie or Prudence had managed to work it out, and that she expected, given the fine wedding surely coming, that her ladyship's household might finally learn to treat its own family with the decency it had always owed her.
Winnie did not argue the point. The wedding took place that autumn, small parish church near Ashcombe's own land. Lady Ashworth in careful, humbled attendance. Prudence present too, stiff but genuine in the small congratulations she offered before the ceremony began. Winnie wore no grand gown, simple ivory, nothing borrowed, nothing let out at the hem this time, her own. Nathaniel waited at the front of the church in the same dark evening clothes he'd worn the night he walked into that dinner and changed everything. He watched her walk toward him with an expression that had nothing careful in it at all, nothing hidden, just plain, open want. They said their vows in voices that carried, no hesitation in either one. Ashcombe's gardens looked nothing like they had the summer Nathaniel first knelt among them in disguise. The south wall roses, transplanted with great care from Ashworth Manor, had taken root and bloomed twice as full in their new soil. Winnie tended them herself, most mornings, sleeves rolled, same as he used to wear them. The staff had learned within the first month that their new duchess did not simply review garden reports from a drawing-room window. She walked the grounds, knew the names of every undergardener, knelt in the dirt when the roses needed it, regardless of what a duchess was supposed to do with her hands. Nathaniel, once he'd properly exposed the steward's years of quiet theft and mistreatment and set the tenant accounts right, found himself with considerably more time than he'd expected. He spent a good portion of it in the garden, beside her. The following spring, the estate held its first proper tenant fete in nearly a decade, a celebration Winnie had proposed herself over Nathaniel's mild protest that no duke in living memory had bothered with such a thing. Then it's past time one did, she had told him, and he had not argued further. The fete filled the south lawn with long tables, fresh bread, and children chasing each other between the hedges Nathaniel himself had once pruned in disguise. Several of the older tenants, the very families whose cottages Pruitt had left to rot while claiming otherwise in his reports, came forward that afternoon to thank the new duchess personally, having heard by then the full and rather extraordinary story of how their duke had first learned the truth of his own land. "A gardener," one old farmer said, shaking his head with open delight as he told the tale to anyone who'd listen. "Our own duke, on his knees in the dirt, same as the rest of us, and didn't none of us the wiser till the whole county heard of it." Winnie, standing near the roses with a cup of cider in hand, caught Nathaniel's eye across the lawn. He smiled. She smiled back. Most evenings after that, when the light went gold and then soft and then dim, he'd find her there among the flowers, and more often than not there was no music at all, just the two of them, turning slow among the flowers, exactly the way it started. Neighbors who visited Ashcombe in later years often remarked on the peculiar warmth of the estate. A duke and duchess who seemed, against all expectation of their rank, genuinely fond of each other, genuinely present in each other's company, in a way that felt entirely unlike the cool arranged marriages so common among their circle. When asked how it had begun, Winnie always told the story the same way. A gardener, a dance with no music, and a secret that turned out to not matter nearly as much as the honesty underneath it. If that garden ending felt exactly right, subscribe. New Regency romances every week. Tell me in the comments, did you suspect the gardener was really a duke before the dinner reveal, or did it land as a surprise?